last time we talked about one very important element of raising children, which the Shaykh says he uses a Muslim, the ideal Muslim uses the best methods to bring up their children. Uses the best methods, so it understands the psychology of the child. And that's critically important. And it made me think of a point which isn't directly mentioned here, but something that I think is very important, and that is to discuss with your spouse on their psychology of raising children. Because this is a cause of a lot of tension in the home. This is a cause of a lot of tension in the home. What happens, one of the children does something, and one parent wants to yell at them, the other one wants to treat them, the other one, one wants to talk to them, the other one wants to give them a timeout or punish them. And and this is common. I was talking to one brother who was saying that this is actually seems to be a common trend in a lot of divorces these days, is how the differences between the couples on how to raise the children. And so somebody thinks, well, we should force the child to pray, we should force them to read the Quran, we should force them to memorize the Quran, we should do this, we should do it this way or that way. And this happens to be a very common cause of consternation, of conflict in the home. And I wanted to mention at this point, or at any point in this chapter, that this is something that should be discussed between the husband and the wife. The mother and the father should discuss this among themselves on what are the best ways to raise their children. And this is something that should be done early. It should be done even before you're married. It should be done when you are looking to get married and you're talking to your prospective spouse about what are the things that they like to do and how do they live their lives and what are things important to them. And so this is something that should be talked about at a very early stage, because the fact of the matter is that just raising children is not something that comes to you naturally. It's not something, imagine you go to school, you go to high school, you go to college, you graduate, you get a job, and now your parents think you're ready for marriage, they get you married, you get married, a year later you have a child. Like, what training do you have to raise a child? None, other than you were a child yourself, right? That's your only experience. I graduated, I made it, so now I'm a professor of raising children. No. So, and I got to thinking about, why is it, can you think about in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ where the companions sat down for a class on how to raise the children? I was thinking about this, and I actually thought about this for a long time, and I got the answer very recently from actually a non-Muslim researcher and author on why the parenting is different. See, parenting nowadays is different than it was, hundreds of years ago, or even just a few decades ago, especially in some of the other, eastern parts of the world. And the main difference is this. The main difference is that back then, in those cultures, and maybe even some cultures today in certain parts of the world, a child is raised by the entire village. The child is raised by the entire village, by the entire community. So when a child has only the mother and the father and the brother in the house, and they have no community around, and their family is actually trying to shelter them from the non-Muslim society around them, they have no one to raise with, right? No one to grow up with. And so what you have to do at that point is you have to learn everything you need to learn about parenting, something that was ingrained in all of the elders of the community, of the village, right? In the past, was how to raise a child. And so there are so many people around raising one child at a time that to mess up parenting at that time was difficult. To mess up parenting at that time was difficult. Now, getting parenting right is difficult. But in that culture, getting it wrong is difficult. Why? Because everybody around you is finding a way to love the child, to nurture the child, to make sure they grow up safely. So everyone's teaching them, everyone's giving them love, everyone's giving them compliments. They meet them in the masjid, they see them in the stores, and they see them in the markets. So there was all of this that was happening, right? So nowadays we don't have that same culture. And so in fact we try to isolate our family from the culture around because of what we find to be evils in society. And so because of that, then we have to be extra good parents, right? Not even just good parents, we have to be extra good. We have to make up for that deficiency of no grandparents and no granduncles and a great aunts and uncles and cousins and extended family. Right? So we have to make up for that. And how do we make up for that? We have to learn. We have to learn how to raise children. And the thing is, most people, especially nowadays, if you ask anybody, ask somebody who's newly married and is about to have a child, what are you doing to learn how to parent? How to be a good parent? Say nothing. I'm going to wait for the delivery date. That's it. And then I may be a parent. Right? And so, unfortunately, we make our marriages work the same way. That, back in those days, marriages were, you were part of, there was good and bad of all of these cultures, but you were surrounded by people who you could talk to, people who you could give you advice. Right? Somebody sees you and says, you're doing this wrong. Don't go about doing it this way or that way, right? So you could get so much advice and so much counsel from other people in those societies, but that is not the case nowadays. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that parenting, of how you should parent your children, is something that you need to start thinking about early. And you need to discuss with your husband or your wife, because you might think you have the best way. Because, and I used to think this when I was younger. I said, I'm going to raise my children exactly the way I was raised. And, soon after I had children, I realized it wasn't going to work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Right? And the famous saying of Ali radiallahu an, he says, raise your children for their time, not your time. Raise them for their time, not your time. Not the time that you grew up. And so you have to change. You have to be able to be flexible. But nonetheless, the point is very important that you need to talk to, and what do you do? So let's say your spouse, your wife or your husband says, no, this is a better way of parenting. If they do something wrong, we give them a timeout, we stand them in the corner. There are actually books, I've read dozens of books on parenting, and some of them say don't give them a timeout. Timeout is not good. Some people say you sleep training, right? Sleep train, you guys know what that sleep training means? Who knows what sleep training means? Nobody knows? It's when you let them sleep in their own room, right? And when they wake up and they cry, you just let them cry, and they go back to sleep. And so it trains them to sleep throughout the night. Okay? So there are researchers who say this is a horrible idea. This is a horrible idea for bringing up children. And so we think because it gives us better sleep at night, it must be a good thing. And it teaches them to sleep throughout the night, so this must be a good thing, right? So what I'm saying is, you have to discuss this with your spouse, and then you have to educate each other, right? And this is something that I do and my wife does. Is, if she sees a book on parenting, she says, "Oh, this is a great book. You should read this." Then I'm going to read it, right? And if I find an article and I say, "Oh, look, I learned something great in this article. You should read it," right? So she reads it, right? And then so we start thinking on the same wavelength, right? Whereas if I'm reading the article by myself and I never tell her what's in this article or which expert says this or that, right? She says, "Who are you? You have just as much experience as I have," right? That child was born to us the same day. Child is now 2 years old. You have 2 years of experience in parenting. You have 2 years. Why is your method better? Right? So this is why educating each other. Hey, listen to this lecture. And then when you listen, you say, "Oh, did you see those points? Did you hear those points in that lecture?" And then you talk about it, right? And that's how you come up to this strategy of parenting your children in a collective and sort of agreed upon way. Next, the Shaykh, he talks about the story of bringing your children to the masjid. And in fact, he mentions the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam He says, which is reported in Ahmed and in the book of Imam Ahmed, in which from Shaddad, who reports that the Prophet ﷺ went out carrying Al-Hasan or Al-Hussein. And when he came forward to lead the prayer, he put the child down and started the prayer. He prostrated himself and stayed in that position for a long time. I raised my head and saw that there was a child on his back. So I returned to my prostration. So, they were in sujood for so long, and he was wondering, what happened to the Prophet. So he lifted up his head to see that there's a child sitting on the back of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he went back to his sujood. He continued his prostration. When he had finished the prayer, the people said, Ya Rasulullah, you prostrated for such a long time. And he says, my child was riding on my back, and I did not like to disturb him until he had enough. Until he had enough. And this is Sahih, reported by Imam Ahmed. So, this story, it makes me, every time I hear this, it makes me think about, and I'm open to hearing what you folks have to say, is, when is the right time to bring your children to the masjid? When is the right time to bring your children to the masjid? When they're newborns, when they're 6 months, when they're a year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5. What do you guys think? 6? When he starts walking? What do you guys think? There's no wrong number. First, I don't have a right or wrong answer. So whatever you say is for discussion. What do you guys think? Yes, brother. 6. What else? When they can sit still on their own. So meaning like 1 year? 2.5, 3 years? But that's also when they can run the most wild, right? Yes, brother?
Once they start understanding.
They start understanding. Start understanding Islam. Like what age is that?
Around
8 or 10. So for 8 or 10 years, you don't bring them to the masjid? 10 is a significant number. So I mean, I'm asking all of you because your opinions matter, right? Because everybody prays here, right? Just like any masjid, the whole congregation prays in the masjid, but everybody has different feelings about when is the right time to bring the child to the masjid, right? And what happens is, if there's a noisy child, right, then everybody looks around, especially those people who think that child is too young to be in the masjid, right? And then if somebody else has children, and maybe they're 7 or 8 or 9, and then you see this person coming to the masjid, but they never bring their children, and then you start wondering, like, how come you don't bring your children to the masjid? Like, you start doubting, like, is he even a good parent? Right? So everybody has different ways of going about it. And I would tell you from, all of my reading and research, there is no perfect answer. There's no perfect answer. But what I've seen in my experience, and this is something what I did with my children, and you're happy to agree or disagree or have make other suggestions, is so all my children, even when they were 3, 4 years old, when they would go to the masjid, they would sit when it's time for salah, or they would pray. The reason for that is that when we were in the house, when it was time for prayer, we gave our kids 2 options. We didn't force them to pray, but we gave them 2 options. You can either pray with us, or you sit quietly. Since the age of 1 or 2. That's it. So you don't have to pray. If you want to pray, that's great. Maybe you'll get a cookie or something, you get some kind of treat. But you either sit quietly, not even playing with a toy, not even reading a book, because I wanted to show them that this salah is so important. I don't want you doing anything else that is so-called fun during the time it's time for prayer. You either sit quietly, be bored, or you get up and pray. And that was also, it kind of teaches them to get up and pray, right? Why would you just sit there being bored? Like a little kid who's like 2 years old is going to sit there, they don't have the patience, right? So they're either going to join you, pray with you, right? Or they're going to want to play with something. And if they play with a toy or even just, anything, pick it up. So no noise while the prayer is happening. And so they learn to respect the prayer. So even if they come to the masjid, either they pray, or the other option is they're used to sitting down quietly. But that requires some level of training and teaching before you bring them to the masjid. Like there was no I didn't have a strong desire to take my 2-year-old to the masjid or 3-year-old to the masjid. Yeah, eventually they will go. But if they're really good, right, I can take them to the masjid. They can sit, they can watch other people pray, they can pray with us, they get to see the community. And in fact, for most of you who bring your children, right, going to the masjid is fun. For most kids, if you tell them, I'm not taking you to the masjid, they'll start crying. I remember this happened very vividly. I remember I told my son when he was like 4 or 5 years old, this was his punishment. If he's not a good boy, he doesn't get to go to the masjid. So, when you bring him to the masjid, you tell him you have to be well behaved. And so, this is something that you need to start doing at an early stage, and try to inculcate that, kind of behavior from, it requires you to be thoughtful. It requires you to know what you want your child to do in the future. It's not, you don't live in the moment. You don't, your child is 8 years old now, 10 years old. You're like, you know what? Yeah, I haven't taken him to the masjid. Maybe I should start taking him to the masjid. Then you bring him to the masjid. They see a huge playground, and all they want to do is play. Should they play afterwards? Yeah, they can play, right? Respectfully, knowing that it's a masjid and things like that, right? But they can play. They can wrestle. They can do whatever safely that they want to do. So depending on what the rules are of that particular masjid, but those are things that they can do, but they don't do that during the prayer. And so that requires certain level of thoughtfulness, right? Something that we should all do before we are ready to bring our children to the masjid. Any comments on that? I want to see what you guys think about that thought process. Yes. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, the brother's saying you give them bringing them to the masjid is like a reward. They get out of the house, they see people, they make friends. So you say if you finish all your homework, you finish your work, and you're well behaved, and you do a good job, then you get to go to the masjid. So make it a rewarding experience for them. Good. Anything else? Any other comments? No? You guys agree with me? Yes. I'm sorry? Yeah, forcing them to come to the masjid at what age? Yeah, 7, 8, it's so again, I don't have a perfect answer. So the brother's asking, and whoever has an answer can speak up, is how about forcing them to come to the masjid? Forcing them to come to the masjid, is that something that should be done? What do you guys think? What do you think about forcing your children to come to the masjid? You guys are very shy. Is that a good idea? What do you think? What you gonna say? Yeah, just to tell them it's important to go to the masjid. Okay, good. What else? Yeah, good. Jazakallah khair. The brother is saying we should not force them, but we should encourage them, right? And tell them the rewards of coming to the masjid. Yes, somebody else is gonna. Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. So sort of working it in with the sort of encouragement, passively kind of, saying the benefits of going to the masjid. Look, your friends are there. Those kinds of things. I would say, children want to be like their parents. Children want to be like their parents. They want to be like grown-ups. So when you do something, you do it long enough, they will want to go with you. Right? The problem is, and we're going to talk about this in a future lecture, maybe coming up next week or the week after, is that we've given them so many distractions to keep them away from everything else. All the important things, whether it's school, whether it's Quran, whether it's hifz, whether it's learning the religion, whether it's going to the masjid. We've given them so much else with no control, with no discipline, with no restraint at all, that they have no reason to do anything that you tell them to do. Right? You say, okay, go do your homework. They're like, no, I just want to play. Okay, no, do your homework. Okay, and then they'll open their book and then put the game down here and they're playing. Right? So the distractions nowadays are so strong. They're strong, they're addictive. Right? In the past, nothing was this addictive. And social media is designed to addict you to the highest level. Designed to addict you to the highest level. And this happens, don't even talk about kids. Just look at adults. You open your Facebook or whatever, right? You start flipping, you see one video, like, oh, that's funny. Okay, next video. Oh, haha, that's funny. Next video. When do you stop? How many dozens of videos do you watch before you stop? Right? How many of us, we delay our prayer because of we're looking at these videos, we're watching something, it's designed, the industry does research to make sure, to find the most addictive ways to keep your children and yourselves addicted to this stuff. And I'm not talking about haram stuff, I'm talking about halal stuff. I'm talking about Facebook or WhatsApp or TikTok or Instagram. I'm talking about these things that are perfectly legit to look at. Right? But it's so addictive. And so we want to bore them with, let's go to the masjid, That's not going to work. So there has to be a lot of reasons underlying, like, how much time do we invest in, showing them the importance of the masjid, going to the masjid, showing them, like, here's a family night, for example, everybody's here, we're sitting together, we're learning, we're enjoying, we're having dinner, children are playing. So all of these things, like, all of that has to go together. It's not going to be one single answer to answer that question. Any other last thoughts before we close? Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about that. I think one of the later lectures also is the brother's talking about, why don't you, if your child is friends with, Brother Ahmed's child, you say, Brother Ahmed, are you going to take your child to the masjid? Why don't our children meet at the masjid? So they get to see each other, right? And so that's another great way to develop that. But again, that requires you to be friends with other people that have a like mind, right? Not be friends with people who rather be playing or who rather be doing a lot of other things. And so, one of the things I talk about later in this chapter is about who gets to be their friends. Who gets to be their friends? And just ask yourself, as a preparation for that talk, how many of your child's friends have you chosen for them? What percentage of your child's friends did you choose for them? And how many did they choose themselves? It's a very, very important question. And we'll talk about, I'll tell you my experience, and I'm happy to hear about your experiences. So we'll continue this discussion further. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
on the phone talking, and then he says something, but he doesn't respond. And then he goes talking to me while we're on the phone. He's like, who else would I be talking to?
I think having two angles